This report is utterly damning and should shame us in this House. It finds the current system of protecting the most vulnerable children in our community, in our country, is unsustainable. The approach of police forces is not proactive enough, and that vulnerable children are simply not being identified or protected. Resources and the failures and variability of partnership working are identified as key concerns. And it comes on the same day as a leaked government report into the drug trade shows vulnerable children falling into the grip of gangs at an unprecedented rate. These are two sides of the same crisis, and it's a crisis reaching into every town and community across the country. The Children's Commissioner has been sounding the alarm for several years now. 2.3 million children, she finds, are living with risk because of their vulnerable backgrounds. As many as 1.6 million of these children have patchy or no statutory support whatsoever. After a decade in which the safety net that vulnerable children rely on, Sure Start, family support services, speech and language therapy, behavioural support, social services and probation have been picked away, it is becoming far too easy for the most vulnerable to be preyed upon by serious, organised criminals. And it is thoroughly unacceptable that the police are not recognising or evaluating risks to children well enough, as this report has found. Children living in care are not being properly protected. Schools are becoming too eager to expel and off-roll. Pupil referral units are becoming the recruiting grounds of vicious criminals. And the total lack of both mental health and residential care beds has led to too many children being inappropriately detained or being ferried around the country in the backs of police cars. This is a whole system failure, and the consequences for children and families are stark. Over £880 million has already been lost from children and youth services since 2010. The flagship Early Intervention Fund, announced by the former Home Secretary last spring, was supposed to make funding available for critical support to steer young people away from serious violence. But answers to parliamentary questions have revealed that over 60% of bids from police and crime commissioners for these projects, including 24 in London alone, and one to tackle the vicious exploitation known as county lines, have been rejected. The former Home Secretary had previously promised to do everything in his power to tackle county lines exploitation and the vulnerable children swept up in it, but then quietly rejected a £1.3 million bid from West Mercia, Staffordshire and Warwickshire to fund a project designed to tackle exactly that. In total, the government are only funding 29 diversion projects nationwide. If this report is not the catalyst for the government to get serious, then nothing will be. And we know of the Prime Minister that in his short time in his office, that when things get tough and there are difficult questions to be answered, he goes missing. When it comes to protecting the most vulnerable children, we simply cannot afford for him to do so again. So specifically on the findings of the report, firstly on data sharing, the Minister knows as well as I do that this is repeatedly an issue that comes out in serious case reviews and in response to child protection. And despite amendments and specific amendments in the Data Protection Act which allow the sharing of data for safeguarding purposes, it still remains an issue. So what can we do further to break down the organisational and cultural silos that are preventing data sharing and stopping organisations working together to protect children? With forces and services facing unsustainable need, what resources are the government going to put in place to tackle that need and properly fund local authority children's services after £880 million taken from their budgets? Given the report praises the approach in Wales around adverse childhood experiences and the collaboration of the four forces there with local services in order to provide targeted early support, what plans does the government have to replicate such an approach in England? We have consistently said that implementing a public health approach to meet this crisis will require leadership from the Prime Minister down. It can be done, but it requires political will in order to bring together and coordinate the agencies, departments and police forces that can make a difference in identifying and protecting children earlier. Clearly, this is happening in some local authority and force areas, but it is far too inconsistent. So will the Prime Minister now convene a task force led out of central government, chaired by him, to bring together these services, identify the support that will have a tangible effect, and ensure that the national strategy on child abuse is led from the heart of Number 10?